Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Literary as FECK with myself, Nick, and himself.
Brazilian Pete.
Yep. It's funny you should bring up Brazil because our original intended book to talk about tonight was Fordlandia, which is all about the Amazon. But
Is
neither of us has quite finished that yet. So as a
oh,
stopgap,
coming
we,
soon, I believe they
yes,
say.
yeah.
Yes.
Um, as a stopgap, we're going to look at another sort of crime adjacent, whatever you would call noir sort of a book. I Married a Dead Man, written by Cornell George Hopley Woolrich, who this is the first book by him I've read. And I
Okay.
didn't really know much about him before reading this, and then just today doing a little bit of a read around, and
N-
found out some.
Not a reach around.
No, although it's interesting you should bring that up. But because
I'm out
one of
full of interesting things today.
the um, so do you already know about maybe you mentioned off air that you have read some of
Yeah,
our
I'm becoming a bit of a Woolrich fan actually. I think this might be the third or fourth book of his that I've read. I particularly liked um Waltz into Darkness, I think is my favorite of his that I've read, including this one as well. This is just to get ahead of it. It's good.
yeah.
But Waltz into Darkness is really, really something rather special.
Well, when I was reading about, I read a few reviews of this book, and a few people were sort of saying that like it is good, but it's not where they would recommend you start, even though it is where I
Yes,
started. But they did
yes.
mention a few of the ones that maybe have black in the title,
Black
the
in the
bride
title. Yeah, yeah.
Bride Wore Black, The Black Curtain. I quite want to read Marijuana, actually, I have to say, based on it looks very Reefer Madnessy.
Okay.
Um, it looks like it might be fun. Um, and then he wrote a lot of these books. There's two of him. He's a bit of a Westlake Richard Stark because about half these books are written under the name of William Irish. This is actually one of the books he
Right.
wrote under the William Irish name. And it looks as though he kind of started out as an F. Scott Fitzgerald kind of clone, writing a series of these sort of roaring 20s jazz age books. And then as the bloom kind of fell off of that in the 30s with the Depression, he transitioned over to writing these the books that maybe made him famous, these kind of more noir
Yes.
thing.
You can tell he's coming from a slightly like you can tell he's not coming from like a place of being a fan of other people's crime and noir and then
Yeah.
writing it himself. Like he's clearly comes from a different, like he's reading things different from what
Yes.
you know what I mean.
He's not reading the pulps.
No, I don't think so. One curious thing that popped out, because obviously nowadays when you read these books, they tend to be little kind of mini bios and things
mhm.
like that. And I always read them every time. Oddly,
Mhm.
they're short. But the one thing that jumped out at me this time, which I must have read before, but for some reason didn't register with me, was he ended up losing a leg at one point, right? Getting amputated.
Yes, to
For,
gangrene.
yeah, for all, I'm sure it's a bit more complicated than this, but basically because he wore a shoe that was too tight for him. Like
Okay.
that's
So
what kind of instigated somehow he was wearing shoes that were too tight for him and
he's
clearly let it get out of hand because you'd think at some point there'd be you'd think there'd be a big gap between, oh, these shoes are too tight and I have to
you
have
need to
my
have your
leg
leg
removed.
amputated.
But he clearly let it
But
go way too long, right?
well, yes, apparently. So I mean, I think one thing that's not in contention is that he was a pretty serious alcoholic, and that worsened right as he got
Yes.
older, and then that brought about diabetes. And diabetes is obviously famous for creating issues with your extremities, right? You can end up losing fingers and toes and feet with
Yes.
diabetes, especially if you're an alcoholic. who has diabetes. But yeah, I
And
can
if
see
your
that.
shoes are too tight.
And if you're yes, and if you're definitely neglecting to wear proper size shoes.
But the
Um,
interesting thing about that, and the because that's the thing as well. Like you're in danger sometimes of romanticizing someone's kind of somewhat tragic life and how that may kind of um how that may or may not uh lead to the writing being interesting.
yeah.
But so you don't want to do it, but on the one hand you do wonder, because the one thing in general, and this book like every Woolrich thing that I've read has this, and it's something which I really like. I suppose the thing about him that I like most of all is he has this extremely melancholy
Hmm.
worldview,
Oh yes.
which is almost anything you can think of. It's kind of, it reminds me a little bit, like that that line in the film I Walked with a Zombie, where they're looking at like all, the twinkling beautiful things out at sea, and then someone
Hmm.
points out like, yeah, all that twinkling beauty, that's dead shit. Like it's that kind of worldview
Yeah.
where
Hmm.
almost everything is tempered by some kind of sadness about the futility of life and everything
Hmm.
heading towards the heat death of the universe or something like that. Like,
Right.
and you do wonder how tied up that is in the fact that like you said, he was this alcoholic, and
Hmm.
seemed to have led to a certain extent like a life unfulfilled, like living with one or other of his parents, it seems like the
His
majority of
mom,
life.
his mother, yeah, and that stuff all reads very much like, or like reading about that, it seemed very similar to Kenneth Williams, and
Right,
those sections of his diary
right.
were so. But this is the interesting thing. So it's been taken as for granted because his biographer, somebody
Mm,
called Francis Nevins Jr., has kind of been beating this drum since like the 1960s that Woolrich was a promiscuously gay man who
right,
wore like a sailor's costume and like frequented the the docks basically, right? Married this woman in this sham marriage and then somehow left his diaries like when that never consummated the marriage and so on. Um, and that he was a like a really self-loathing uh gay
right.
person, you know. Um, but there's this really good article that basically pokes all kinds of holes in that
Okay.
over at what is it, crimereads.com. So
Okay.
it's called Do People Really Know What They Think They Know About Cornell Woolrich by Curtis Evans. And it's a long, long article and it's very well researched and it really
Make a note of that.
um, asks a lot of, or it really just points out the paucity of any actual evidence. Now, he's not saying for sure that he wasn't gay, but he is saying for sure that there's no evidence for sure that he was, that he may have been severely socially anxious, that he may have been asexual, like just not
Right.
capable of consummating, right? That he was also probably anemic and had several other health conditions that may have also been blocks to him kind of being able to even consummate a marriage. So there's, yeah, anyway, it's definitely, it pokes a lot of holes in this kind of apparently consensus because everyone uses this evidence from this biography and repeats these claims over and over again and sometimes embellishes them,
Hmm.
but that there's actually virtually nothing to them. Um, but it makes a great story to think of him in a sailor suit.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing as well. Sometimes, I mean, I don't know where you stand. Like, obviously, I appreciate anyone kind of trying to get to the truth of something, but we do seem to be in this period now where there was like this kind of wave of people who wrote like biographies of figures, like the original wave of biographies of various people, where we get our kind of perceived wisdom of
Mhm.
them from, and they're clearly like telling, I suppose, what Werner Herzog would call the ecstatic truth or something, right? Like not the accountant's truth, that like the
Right.
like and yes, taking liberties with detail, but at the aim of getting to some kind of greater truth or something like that, right? And now it's time to go back and reevaluate, and but sometimes I feel as if the original run of they seem to have got at something, um they seem to have penetrated through and captured something that is essentially true, even if the details,
Are
do you know
wrong.
what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Like,
But yeah, potentially. But I also think, I suppose too, there's an element of like, particularly in this whoever this biographer is, and who has tended to be the person. And anytime there's a collection of short stories, or whatever, this is the person they go to write the biographical information.
right,
And there's kind of repeated beating of this drum about basically him being a horrible person and a self-loathing
right.
gay man, the rest of it, which to a degree, there was some of that are kind of around Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard as well. Like their early biographers were kind of weirdly unsympathetic
Mm,
to them, all the while extolling the virtues of the fiction, but kind of saying like they were fucking losers, and which maybe maybe they were. I don't know.
right.
But you're kind of like, I don't know.
No, I know that it's obviously it's better to have a diversity of opinion rather than just, you know, just assuming, because yeah, if everyone's going from the same playbook and there's no attempt at a alternative look at this, or just another way of thinking about it, clearly that's not, it's it's always richer to have diversity of opinion, right?
Right.
But I'm just wondering, sometimes when those revisionist versions come out, it's a bit of a throwing the baby out of the bathwater kind of thing, right? Like sometimes we totally devalue those original takes,
Right.
and I think there's something about a when you have a clear field and it's powder snow and no one's been there before, there's something comes along with that, right? That is,
Right.
anyway, we're straying.
Oh, no, well, I will say there's one more thing that I think is
Okay.
worth bringing up, and it is kind of perfect at the same time to think, because apparently, like, that sense of melancholy and sadness that's kind of so steeped in this story, and apparently all of his writing is kind of steeped in.
Mm,
It is kind of perfect that the only person writing about him after all the years is somebody who seems to dislike him intensely. That there's something that it's just, almost like it's perfectly self-fulfilling for Woolrich. Of course, the only person who's writing about my books thinks I'm a piece of shit and has been sharing that idea with the world for like 50 years now, or whatever it is.
right. Yes, he'd probably
Um,
he well, yeah, he may smile.
he may have appreciated the
Yeah.
whatever the irony, or but anyway. So this book has been made a couple of times into films. One is Japanese. That's the one I'm most interested in seeing.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to find. I was poking about. I couldn't find.
Okay.
It's actually that's the other thing worth mentioning as well, I think, is Woolrich isn't necessarily a forgotten writer by any means, especially for people who are into like crime and noir and stuff like that. But he
Mhm.
certainly seems to have, considering how many times he's been adapted to the screen over the years,
Mhm.
it's kind of,
Like Rear Window is obviously one of the most
yeah, yeah,
famous,
the most
right?
famous. But like it's surprising to me like that he's not like still a proper kind of household name in a way, because he's been adapted. Like if you look into it, I mean, there's a lot. Like that few
Mhm.
authors have been adapted quite as often as, and a lot of his stuff is like a certain. I like this book, for example, has been adapted at least 5 or 6 times, right? So there's
Mhm.
a few that they've gone back to again and again, but a lot of his stuff has been adapted. It's not just like the one thing
Mhm.
that struck, and he's been adapted. Like, so I'm just surprised that clearly at a certain point he was considered, pop
Yeah, I mean,
gold, I guess. But
and I mean, even when he died, although apparently he was living in kind of like apparent abject kind of poverty and illness and the rest of it, but he had quite a bit of money. Like he had like supposedly nearly $1 million when he died, and he gave it all to some university.
mhm,
Um, so like yeah, so he did apparently do quite well across most of his literary life in terms of making money, you know.
right.
Refused to go and see the Truffaut, how do you say it's fucking the French
Before the
Truffaut,
Bright
yeah.
Black, yeah.
Yes, he refused to go see that apparently. He didn't like any of the filmic adaptations of any of his work. But he himself wrote for Hollywood for a while too. That's one of his
Yes.
earlier jobs is he was a screenwriter. Um, but yeah, so it's kind of to your point, apparently, like so, like the version that I bought of this is like it's an ebook with a great
Nice cover, yeah.
cover, yeah. Um, but like you know, it seems like a lot of his work was out of print for a long, long time. Like, and even now, if you're buying it, it seems like you're getting sort of public domain, you know, ebooks rather than actual. Like, it's not like Penguin seems to be putting out
Right.
like treating his work with the same level of appreciation as a lot of other maybe even writers like who would have been lesser known in their time.
Yes.
Like the way Lovecraft, for example, has gotten, you know, these beautiful, massive tomes of full of endnotes and the rest of it.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like there's much of that.
Which is surprising as well, doubly surprising because, like we said, because he was coming from this place of kind of aiming for maybe uh I hate to use the phrase, but I'm struggling to. It's not my fault, but how someone else might phrase it. Then
Mhm.
a higher form of literature, right?
Right.
The fact that he was aiming and I think hitting that note as well. I mean,
Yes.
these are.
Mhm.
I mean, this is an extremely well written book with
Mhm.
quite a few moments where you just kind of stop and go,
Mhm.
damn, that was a well turned phrase.
Yeah.
Like it's like he's really got a knack for summing up, like, yeah, like we said, as this kind of certain dark heart at the center of the world and summing it up into, and he'll just pepper it in.
Mhm.
Like the story will be going along at a fair, because again, it's very readable. Like it's
Mhm.
because, so yeah, on the one hand, even though we might be talking about how some uh he's slightly more highfalutin than
Yeah,
your,
yeah. It's a bit more of a literary style
yeah,
than.
but that doesn't mean it isn't as propulsive as
Mhm.
insert name of more widely
Yes.
regarded
Mickey
slash
Spillane.
author here. Yeah, like, so you're reading, you're enjoying it, and it's getting on, and then just boom, they'll be like, oh fuck, that's beautiful, man, and then it just
Mhm.
carries on again,
Yeah.
and it's no, he's I, I'm wondering if there's anything you can compare him to in that way, like um when we did the big clock, I guess there's a certain amount.
Yes.
Kenneth Fearing has that to a certain extent,
Yeah. And
right?
I
But
think
Kenneth Fearing's,
the best of Charles Williams maybe as well.
yeah, yeah, maybe. Um, Again, I'm not. I'm just trying to put into it like a kind
Mhm.
of context for maybe people who think that they might want to skip this because they're not Jim Thompson
Right.
or
Jim Thompson, yeah.
Charles Williams or something like that. This is this has a slightly broader appeal, I
Mhm.
feel, and also I think it borders on gothic as well to a certain
Yeah.
extent. So I can imagine
Yes.
like people
Yeah.
who wouldn't necessarily maybe read that much crime fiction, but like, yeah, they like maybe they read more horror or something like that in general.
Right. Oh
And
yeah, the slow ratcheting up of tension across the book, that's really effective, you know, like
yeah,
that the almost a histrionic quality to the mental energy of the because I mean really I mean I guess we should talk a little bit about the story.
yeah. Well,
It's
I was going to say as well, even though I didn't mean to do it, I almost, I think I stumbled across by accident a good analogy there when I mentioned I walked with a zombie. Actually, this kind
Hmm.
of does remind me of those Val Luton
Mm,
films
yeah,
of the
yeah.
40s, right? It's
And that
that.
that that cover really kind of
Mm,
leads into that as well, right? And it becomes quite a clever title in the end because really, she kind of marries three dead men across the story in a way.
right.
Um, because I mean, so I mean, I mean, I think I feel like you kind of end up having to maybe spoil this a little bit, right? At
Yes.
least up to a certain
Spoiler
point.
alert.
Um, so I can recommend this right now. I'll get ahead.
Yeah, yeah,
I
go
recommend this for
read
sure.
it,
So
and then
yeah, as usual, come back.
yes. I mean, no one's going to do that.
No.
You're just going to
Um,
turn us off and never come back. See you. Bye.
yeah, exactly.
Realistically, but you never know. Someone
Yeah.
might.
So yeah, I mean,
Welcome back.
basically, yes, the book follows. Well, the book opens up with a chapter that it definitely it took quite a while for the other shoe to drop for me. I was almost maybe a study over 2/3 of the way through. I was like, oh, I get what's going on in that first chapter. I think,
Mm,
right? Because the first chapter basically opens with a nameless married couple, both of whom are convinced other their spouse has murdered somebody, and they live in this state of constant kind of dread and fear that at some point the marriage will just fall apart because of this suspicion and acrimony in the air and just general, yeah. Um,
mm.
and yeah, so I mean, and then the story kind of starts proper, and then at the end of at the very end of the story, you come back to this scene again, now understanding who these two people are. Um, but basically, our main character is a young woman who has been jilted, I think. She's pregnant, heavily pregnant. She gets in a train, and she thinks she's going to have to stand the whole way, but some nice young couple, basically, the man offers her a seat. She sits down, and it's because the woman he's with is also pregnant, and she strikes up a friendship or whatever, I guess, a conversation with this young woman. It turns out they're quite wealthy, these and they're heading back from New York to San Francisco in order to this young woman is gonna meet her new husband's family for the first time, and um, and then there's a really well written crazy train crash
Mm.
where the two pregnant ladies go off to the toilet together, and it's really like it's weird. It takes you a moment to even figure out what's happening. The way it puts you in the place, but in such a way as to make it as strange as it might be to suddenly have everything shifting at wrong
Yeah,
angles,
but that's another thing Woolrich is a master of, I think, is almost defusing a situation that someone else would write for more dramatic effect.
Mhm.
Kind of like a scene in a film or something where something extremely like I don't know, violence or something is happening, but someone suddenly has tinnitus or something, and you just get
Yes, yes.
like he's very good at
Or
uh,
this kind of the slower bit, or when somebody's kind of choking or whatever, and and under dust, and people are trying to help them out, and then the camera pulls back, and you suddenly realize, oh my God, their entire bottom half's been sheared off. But that
yeah,
information be kept from you for a few moments so that you don't get the full horror of it. Because in fact, also then she ends up surviving, but she's trapped in the rubble, and this young couple, they're both killed. But she also has the child, which it takes you a moment to figure that out because she goes through this experience of intense pain, but you think it's just connected to the fact that she's been in a train crash, but then you realize, oh no, shit, she actually just had the baby as well in this awful situation. Um,
yeah. The other thing that he's a master of as well is that thing about like plowing straight into something without there's no sense of a gear shift, and then you're
right.
halfway through the next passage and like, oh, hang on, something
Yes.
extremely significant has just happened.
Yeah,
um
not a lot of hand holding.
no, and so you have to kind of backtrack a little bit to make sure if you're reading I did that a
Mhm.
few times in this,
Yep.
like went back and hang on, did I read that right?
Mhm. Um, so then she wakes basically then she wakes up in hospital only to discover that she's been mistaken for the other young lady because because it was a weird, slightly contrived thing where they exchange wedding, like she puts the wedding ring on the other lady, right?
You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff in this book in anyone else's hands
Right, would be
would seem
hacky.
extremely contrived. Like
Yes.
the whole pregnancy thing as well, actually, the way that's just kind of brought up and you hang on, is it this hasn't been mentioned? This seems unlikely that this wouldn't have been mentioned already because they're heavily pregnant as
Yeah,
well.
both of these. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, that kind of that I mean, yeah, like you said, that thing about exchanging the ring, and there's a whole bunch of other things that, yeah, in anyone else's hands, they would come clanging in like boom,
Yeah.
boom, ding-a-ling-a-ling, pay attention, plot point,
Right.
ding-a-ling-a-ling,
Hmm.
but doesn't happen here.
Yes, yeah, he does get away with it. But anyway, so she ends up waking up in hospital only to discover that more or less, and she realizes, of course, too, that the parents won't expect to know because there's a bunch made of the fact that no photographs have ever been shared with the family, no letters like that ever described her. There was all of this kind of, yeah. Anyway, again, kind
Again,
of
something
really
that's so
contrived.
very contrived, but no, it
It
doesn't
somehow
happen.
works.
Yeah, well, it's
Um,
quite remarkable, really, how he manages to. It's almost like a magician. It's like a sleight of hand thing, isn't it?
mhm.
Like
Yes,
he's a really good close up card
magician.
magician. Yeah,
Yes. Um, so so yeah, so more or less the story is that she then gets adopted into this family as being the fiance of their dead son, and this is, the parents don't know that she's not, and that the child is not their grandchild. Um, but she brings a certain amount of love and life and warmth back to this house where they've just lost one of their eldest son.
Hmm.
Um, and she is also, although she feels tremendously guilty, they don't set her up as a villain. Like she's not. This is not it's more she fights against it at almost every stage.
Yes,
She wants to tell people what's really happened and the rest of it, but then she finds herself. She's so poor. The kid is so. Um, yeah, just at certain point she's like, it's really comfortable here. This is a really nice house, and these people seem really nice, and maybe we can make it work somehow. I won't re-traumatize them by telling them that this isn't their
right,
grandchild.
right.
And then the other son, the younger brother of the dead man that she's basically now married to, um, he falls in love with her, and so that adds another wrinkle. And he seems to cop on quite early on that she's probably not who she says she is, but then lets it go. And then the actual father of her child, who's a real piece of shit, which is established at the very beginning of the book when he basically sends her like $5 in a train ticket to get the fuck out of New York.
Right. But you don't
Um,
really know that
that
yet. Uh,
Yeah, although I mean I guessed that that's what was going on there. That
yeah, well,
so
yeah, I mean, go on.
I was gonna say he kind of holds back into view and then attempts to extort the situation for everything he can get out of it, basically, right?
What I was going to say there was in terms of the guessing thing. So that's the other thing I quite like about this as well, is the fact that yes, there you do find yourself like trying to, like you said, that opening, like put it into like how is this going to play out,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
even though it's not a massive surprise, and you probably will kind of you will get ahead of the
Yeah.
book to a certain extent. At the very end, it kind
Hmm.
of just it's not a twist exactly, but it's like it's a reconfirmation of something that hasn't been highlighted necessarily. Like it's something that's kind of almost um forgotten, but it's reiterated. And that's like the extra twist in a way. Then you're like, oh, so who did it? Because it
Yeah.
kind of
It's
deliberately
actually still unclear to me.
obfuscates a scene, right?
It's
And
really unclear to me at the end of the book who actually,
yes,
yeah,
and
who
it's
killed
deliberately done that way, I think,
this person.
because it's like there's a scene that plays out and it's obfuscated, but because it's such a fun read and you're on to the next thing, you don't stop and think about it too much. So you
Mhm.
you've forgotten about it. And then when it comes round to that again, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that element. So oh yeah, who did? So there's like a weird.
Yeah,
It's like they
it's
really
great.
give the who done it element, but not telling you who done it or something like that.
Exactly, yes. And that ending is, it does remind me of the more existential Jim Thompson endings, the ones that just leave their characters in a state of like terrorized sadness, and just like fuck, life is just shit now. And that's kind of
Mm.
that's I mean, I think literally the
But
last lines of the book.
also in a way that is like it's not doom porn. It's not like dwelling on. It's not like going out of its way to to pile on like some. It's not like a Bret Easton Ellis or something like that. It's like
No.
it's almost as if Woolrich is incapable of not seeing the the futility or the dark side
Right.
of
Right.
everything
It
in a way. It feels very non-contrived and yeah, I don't know how to explain it. It's just it feels like it's unavoidable. He's not like going over there and treading in that dog turd just to tread in the dog turd. It's just
Mhm.
the street is essentially made of dog turds. You can't not on a
Right.
dog turd. Um,
It And apparently, so I guess, I mean, I'd be interested to see if any of the films adapt. Apparently, like most of them don't adapt the ending, like in that way that, say, for example, which is the one, um, the Steve McQueen,
it's a great escape.
no, The
Oh,
Getaway.
right.
So like The Getaway famously has never, it's been made twice, and both times they've rigorously avoided adapting the last chapter. Like they're really where they escape
Right.
to and how absolutely grim that their situation is, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like most of the films adaptations of this also kind of just hand wave away that question mark about who killed this character, right? And instead have it be very clear, and it's neither of the two characters, and everything's fine, and they live happily ever after. Like yeah.
Right. Because there's a Barbara Stanwyck. There's like a Hollywood one. There's a Indian one which I'm keen to see. There's
Yes.
the 80s one, the French one seems as if that might be
Well, they might adapt the ending. Yeah, that
yeah,
might. And I'm
that might
assuming
be
that
the
the
one.
whatever the hell is the one with Ricky Lake, likely.
Yeah, you never. It's funny that that one is like. So you look at like if you didn't know it was a Cornell Woolrich adaptation, you just look at the cover
Mhm. It looks like a
and
romantic comedy.
yeah, it's like what the fuck. It looks like a film I would never consider
Hmm.
watching in a million years.
Yes.
Um, and there's a TV movie as well, and yeah, so yeah, there's I'm certainly going to give the Barbara Stanwyck and the Indian and the
The
um
French want to go.
French one to go. Yeah,
And if you find the Japanese one, let me know, because that's that one I'm.
yeah,
They might.
yeah,
Japan might have gone dark. They might have, if they'd gone back to the actual novel rather than just remade the American film, then they might give it the proper ending. Um,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, anyway, I thought this was good. It clipped along at a good pace. As you said, some magnificent turns of phrase. Um, and it really just nicely ratchets up the tension. Lots of just the great, like when she's being kind of terrorized by letters every morning when she gets to the table. Like it really does work.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. No, and yes, to your point earlier, you'd read that someone had written that this may not be a great entry point. I actually I kind of see where someone's coming from there. So yeah, so if you did um really enjoy this,
Mhm.
then yeah, you haven't peaked yet. There's
Mhm.
and you know, I've only read like 2 or 3 more books than you, so there's a whole, I'm assuming there's a whole other bunch that I'm not aware of as well. So yeah, I'm wondering if Cornell Woolrich completism
Yep, in
is in
our
our
future.
future. Yeah.
Well, I want to read Marijuana. As I said, it looks like it might be quite a bit of fun. Maybe in a slightly more trashy way, and then the black set, like that have black in the title, they all look pretty interesting.
Right.
I'm done. I
Yeah.
don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
No, I think that's about it. So yep, read it. It's good.
Yep.
Bye.